of divvy things up between, this week talk about more the Bible stuff. Next week, talk about more the images. I think it's going to kind of overlap because there's a lot to cover. There are a lot of different aspects to the way that this feast is celebrated. And there's a lot of material to go through, because what we're going to try to do is go through a little bit of the story, and then try to appreciate also some of the finer details. And one of the problems that this feast has is that it has a very nice storyline. And so where, for example, Holy Week and Easter are difficult to go through, this reads very nicely. And unfortunately, a part of that also is that a part of the retelling, a part of the story, is not completely consistent with the gospel tradition. There are nuances that have become much more user-friendly than what they in reality are when you read the New Testament, when you see the words of the prophet being echoed, when you see other details that seem mysterious and not sure what it is. All of those little pieces are very important and shouldn't be just glossed over, and shouldn't be just taken as kind of, not a necessary part of the story. And so that's why what we're going to do tonight is go a little bit more into some of the theological background, some of the reasons why things are perhaps depicted in a certain way in icons and paintings and images historically, and then and still, I think you'll find still a very beautiful experience of the Nativity, with taking into account some of these details. So, as we always do, we're going to begin with prayer, and the prayer that we're going to use are actually, they are from the Vespers of the pre-feast. According to the Byzantine tradition, we're in this intense period of the last days before the Feast of the Nativity. And so all of the monastic hours are already focused on the Nativity. And the prayers, the hymns, ask questions. They begin to kind of draw us in through some of the words of the feast, to draw us into the great mystery of the Incarnation. And so that's what we're going to pray as we begin. And hopefully you'll also see some of the connections to what we talk about this evening. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bethlehem, make ready, for Eden has been opened for all. Ephrata, be alert, for the tree of life has blossomed forth from the virgin in the cave. Her womb has become a spiritual paradise, wherein the divine fruit was planted. And if we eat of it, we shall live and not die like Adam. Christ is coming forth to bring back to life the likeness that had been lost in the beginning. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Isaiah, dancing with joy, receive the word of God. Prophecy of the Virgin Mary, who like the bush burning with flames will not be consumed by the burning presence of our God. Let Bethlehem prepare itself, and Eden open its gates. Let the Magi approach to see wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger of dumb beasts the salvation which the star had pointed out from above the cave, the life-giving Lord and the Savior of mankind. Now and ever and forever, amen. From where did you come, O unwedded virgin? Who is the mother who gave you birth, who begot you? How can you carry the Creator in your arms? How can your womb be his virginal dwelling place? O wondrous marvels and formidable mysteries which have been accomplished on earth through you. Seeing you, all pure one, we prepare what you need in a manner worthy of you. There is a cave which the earth offers you. In the heavens there is a star which urges us to prepare. As for the Magi, they are approaching the west from the east in order to contemplate the salvation of mankind, nourished at the breast as a newborn child. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So what we heard is really the theology behind this feast, the Feast of the Incarnation of Christ. And although we do know the story, we are familiar with the details, there is a greater reality. This is not just about a child being born. The Christmas carol, what child is this, is that questioning that is supposed to happen when we come into the nativity. Because although there is a child, there is much more behind that. God, who created the billions of stars, the planets, the angels, spiritual beings, animals and creatures, water, the earth, and humankind, forming each one in extraordinary detail, a detail that when we consider how everything is made, the individual parts, hold it under the microscope, try to divide it up, using technology so we can see what's inside. All of that was engineered and perfectly designed by the will, the word, and the hand of God. The God who is timeless, changeless, and perfect. And he becomes one of us. He becomes a creature. He lets himself become subject to time, subject to parents, subject to laws, subject to customs. He becomes, in the fullest sense of the word, a human being. And he who can't be contained is contained in the body of the Virgin Mary, she who is his temple. Again, the church gives us a little meditation on this, which comes from the morning prayer of the Feast of the Nativity, December 25th. The one whom the universe cannot contain, how was he contained in a womb? He who is in the Father's bosom, how can he be carried in a mother's arms? All this happened as he himself had ordered and willed, and as he pleased. He who was not limited by a human body chose to become incarnate for our sake. He became what he was not before. He shared our nature without losing his own. Christ is born with two natures to perfect the heavenly world. So we get the answer to some of those questions there. But there is much more to go into. So let's begin a little bit with some of the chronology, because ultimately, when we read the Bible, so there are always the questions about what happened when, and how is it all interconnected. So we can say that the first event in this chronology, this sequence, is the betrothal, the engagement between Joseph and Mary. That happens in Jerusalem. And we know that, we have the details about that primarily from the Proto-Evangelion of James. That fills in a lot of that information. And I will go through that just kind of to recap some of those details for our consideration. After the engagement, the betrothal, and thinking culturally. So the engagement for a young Jewish woman who was, we would say, about 14 or so, 14, 15 years old. So she has a dowry that is to be paid by a price, paid by the groom or the groom's family. And the engagement means that although they shouldn't technically live together as husband and wife, it is permitted that she be taken in by his family. And at that time, they all lived under one roof. So you would have extended family, even multiple generations, all living on one estate or in one big home. Everyone has their own space, we would say, but the family is interconnected in a unique way that is not really familiar to us today. One of the reasons for this happening at the engagement was because it afforded the family of the groom the opportunity, to check out their new daughter-in-law. And also, she would be able to learn from the mother-in-law for her. She would be able to learn about how to take care of her husband or the son of the mother. And so, traditional recipes, things like that would be normal, as far as building a family and beginning a family. And so this was a kind of a trial period. But it's not really a trial. See, now we're used to thinking of engagements as being like, you get a ring, so the bride-to-be gets a ring, and the big proposal, and then hopefully it'll work out and they'll actually get married. I'm sure we all know of people who have had a broken engagement, because that happens too. And it's not that big a deal nowadays. When that happens, although it might be, it's not exactly the happiest thing, it's like, everybody says it's better that they split up before they got married, and then it would have been really complicated. That is our version of engagement. When it comes to the time of Jesus, and within Jewish culture, Jewish setting, the engagement was a very serious step. So serious that it was considered kind of the first part of marriage. And very often, although the couple would not be living together, so there would not be any relationship physically between the two of them. They would already be permitted to go out together, be seen in public together. And so the marriage became just a formality because they were already well invested into what would become their marriage. And so so Mary goes to Nazareth with Joseph, and they are betrothed to be married. We don't have the details how this worked, because from the tradition of the church and the Proto-Evangelion of St. James, we know that Mary's parents were perhaps already deceased, because they do not appear as a part of this. There is no talk about the bridal price being paid. And Joseph, in the tradition of the early church and in the Proto-Evangelion and the tradition of the Eastern Church also, is considerably older. And so, however, even so we don't hear about his parents, so they're probably not a factor in this part of their life together. However, he would still be living in some sort of a family complex, connected to extended family, perhaps his own siblings, perhaps cousins, because that is how family lived. And so, although Mary went with Joseph, they lived there separated. And it is addressed in the Proto-Evangelion, and that I'll share with you when we get to that text. So it is there in Nazareth that the angel comes to Mary, and there are 2 points of Annunciation. The first point of Annunciation is the angel speaking to Mary when she goes to the well in Nazareth to retrieve water. Now, those of you who have been to the Holy Land and have seen Nazareth, so you know it's a big town. In the time of Joseph and Mary, Nazareth was so insignificant that it didn't even appear on some maps. However, it had a well. And water is necessary for life. And so the well, the place of the well, was where everyone went to gather, to draw water that they would need for their daily life. So she goes there. She's addressed by the angel, who only speaks to her, and she becomes afraid. She runs home. When she gets home, so she did bring with her the jug for water. We're told in the Proto-Evangelion that she takes the jug and she places it on the ground, and then she begins to weave. And it is when she is weaving that the angel appears to her. Gabriel speaks to her and appears to her. And they have this very interesting conversation. And the conversation is very important because there are prayers, there are words that are said that carry a lot of meaning. And so this second Annunciation at the home of Mary, so I want to share with you, there is a translation that is used by scholars, translation into English, of the Bible, the New Testament, translated into Hebrew. based also on Syriac or Aramaic, because there Greek as we have it, the Gospels come down to us in Greek text, and then that is translated into Latin and translated into all the other languages. So the Greek culturally loses some of the nuances. And so what scholars have done is gone back using Syriac, which was Aramaic, and it's a Semitic language close to Hebrew, to get some of those nuanced differences. And so the angel, when he speaks to Mary, he speaks in a way that is very poetic and uses very specific terms. And so this is from Luke chapter 1, verse 28. Do not fear, Mary, for you have found favor with God. For behold, you will conceive and bear a son, and call his name Jesus. He will be great, and will be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of David his father. And over the house of Jacob he will reign forever, and his kingdom will have no end. And the terminology that we hear, it should be familiar because it's some of the same terminology that is used in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 9, when he speaks about the Messiah, he uses some of the very same words. And then the interesting detail there, when Mary asks the archangel, how is this possible? Because she has not had any relations with a man. So the archangel offers her as proof, and this is a beautiful image. He offers Mary as proof that this will be accomplished by the hand of God. And he says, look at your cousin Elizabeth. She who was thought to be sterile is now in her 6th month. And that takes us then to the next great event. Mary goes to Elizabeth. And in the tradition of the church, it's thought that she stayed with Elizabeth until John was born, because that would be what family would do, would go there to help her and to accompany her until the birth of the child. In which case, Mary would stay there for 3 months at least, if not a little more. And Mary herself arrived at Elizabeth's home, and she was already with child. And so then we have this wonderful exchange between Elizabeth and Mary. And the interesting, and this is again looking at the text of Luke. Luke uses in English usually we hear this word kind of expressing that Elizabeth uttered. So it's trying to set it aside. She's not just speaking. She is not even. It's not about having a prophetic moment. And so the word that is used about Elizabeth and translated into English, it's usually utters. She utters certain, this welcome to Mary. And the translation, so from the Greek Old Testament, The same word, which we can find in the first book of Chronicles, it actually is a word that is connected with the temple that all the priest utters. And the literal translation of the word means to make loud music or very strongly and loudly speak. But it is something that only the high priest could do. And so Elizabeth's welcome is liturgical. Her words are meant, and this is intentional, that she is meeting Mary the temple. So she has become the priest. And so then when she says the words, and this is again from the Hebrew Syriac translation into English, she says these words that are almost a hymn. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why is this granted me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? When the voice of your greeting came to my ears, the babe in my womb leapt for joy. And blessed is she who believes there will be fulfillment of what was spoken to her from the Lord. And so this is a hymn before the presence of God. Mary as temple, Mary as ark, and that overshadowing of God's presence that is in her womb. And that is it's very strong when you take this. Dialogue is not just a simple conversation, but it is one of those timeless, holy moments where all of creation, all the ideas of holy place, of the overshadowing of God, of the presence of God, all of that comes and happens right there when Elizabeth welcomes Mary. And then we have this, which is a song of praise, which has been sung and turned into a hymn, and the words are parts of many songs that we are familiar with that are sung in church. And so Mary replies, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has indeed seen the low estate of his handmaiden. For behold, from henceforth all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. And his mercy is from generation to generation for those who fear him. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud. He has put down the mighty from their thrones and exalted the lowly. The hungry he has filled with good, and the rich he has sent away empty. He has helped Israel his servant, remembering his mercy as he spoke to our forefathers, to Abraham and his children forever." And in her Magnificat, there again we hear the echo of Isaiah. There are many terms that are used there, and this is, considering this is a young girl, a teenager, 14, 15 years old, and who has been overshadowed by God's presence, who has grown up close to the temple, who was born literally just a couple of blocks from the temple itself. Her parents raised her in holiness. And so it's no surprise that these kinds of words would be a part of her own repertoire. She was not by any means unawares of faith. After all, she was the miracle that was granted to Joachim and Anna. And so she uses certain terms which are very important. Isaiah, his most, I would say, favorite expression for God, for talking about God, is the Holy One of Israel. And so, and she says that, Holy One. And this is not because this was a common term. This is very much unique to Isaiah's way of talking about God. And she picks up on it, and it's very important also because, of course, Isaiah is the prophet of the coming of the Messiah. So the connection is very strong there. And then also, there is a connection to the books. There are two books of Enoch, which are not part of the Catholic Bible. They do figure in some of the Eastern churches. And she also picks up expressions from Enoch, and specifically, he talks about the Holy of Holies, and that the Messiah and God fills the hungry. Because that's an interesting reference when it comes to Mary's Magnificat. She inserts in there, the hungry he has filled with good. And that's, where is that coming from? It's because it's a part of these different prophets who have specifically talked about the Messiah. Enoch, Enoch, is within the early church considered by many of the fathers as a canonical part of the Old Testament. Within Jewish scriptures, so there is a book called the Book of Giants, which seems to be the book of Enoch in a one form or another. One of the issues that the rabbis had with the two books of Enoch was the fact that it seemed very Christian. And so his words, his prophecies connected very strongly with the person of Jesus Christ. And that may be one of the reasons why eventually it did not fit into the canon of Jewish scriptures, but was featured in a different form. But the praise of Mary, so it has these specific reasons that we find in the Magnificat, because he is holy. She praises him because enemies have been defeated. The proud he has scattered, the lowly he has lifted. He fills the hungry with good. And then he has not forgotten those who are lowly and forsaken. And so these themes in the Magnificat, they echo Isaiah, what the Messiah was going to accomplish. And so her prayer builds right on top of Isaiah's words. Now, Mary, after her visit to Elizabeth, she goes back to Nazareth, we suppose. And then it is from Nazareth that she sets out with Joseph to Bethlehem for the census. Both Mary as well as Joseph were of the house of David, and the census was taken tribally, so it was according to family clan. And so they found themselves going to Bethlehem, where there was no room in the inn. And this is, this forms, it's a part of a lot of the Christmas carols, and it's a big theme in the practice of posadas, for example, of taking Mary and Joseph and knocking door to door looking for a place. And going back to the Greek, which is an interesting jump to make. So, place, there is no place. In Greek is topos, and topos is also used as a word for the Holy of Holies, as the place. And in Greek is kataluma, and that same word, kataluma, is also used to signify the place where the borrowed space that was used for the Last Supper. Very same word. So upper room is a different expression, but when we talk about, we'll find the same word being used in reference to the place of the Last Supper, and hence, in the biblical way of applying these words, it also signifies Jerusalem. And so it's a play on words that says that for the manifestation in the flesh of the Messiah, the Son of God, God himself, there was no availability in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And the God-blessed, God-chosen Zion, the holy city of Jerusalem, there was no room in the inn. And so it takes it another level. And this was something that would be very much in the mind of the early church, who read these expressions and thought, this has a secondary meaning. And in all fairness, everything in the Bible has a secondary meaning. There is a lot of layers to peel through. And I think one of the, so of course they go to this this cave. Church's tradition says cave because the caves were used for the keeping of animals, especially overnight. Caves tended to be of a constant temperature all year round, and so they were a stable environment for animals. And we see this is what it brings us right into one of the details that we see on every image of the nativity, and you may even have it in your own nativity set. We see the presence of a donkey and an ox. And the ox, of course, it would be common for any farmer to have cows and ox for tilling the land, especially the rocky land around Bethlehem. So that was not something unusual. And then the donkey was the one that traveled with them from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And when we see these two, so we go right back to the first chapter of Isaiah, verse 2 and 3. Hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth, for the Lord speaks. Sons have I raised and reared, but they have disowned me. An ox knows its owner, and an ass its master's manger. But Israel does not know. My people has not understood. And this connects right there to there was no place for him in the inn. It is basically stating the same, that this manifestation of God, this incarnation that had been predicted, that had been spoken about at length, that had been spoken about by Isaiah, that all the leaders of the Jewish faith and everyone at the temple, all of those who had been reading the signs, who had been interpreting those messages that God had sent, all those people had failed to see what was happening. And so he was born outside of Jerusalem. He was born not in the place that was prepared for God, the temple, the Holy of Holies. He was born in a cave. Creation recognized him. The animals, the angels, and then the lowliest and most insignificant people of the entire 12 tribes of Israel, the shepherds. They came to praise him. The foreigners, the Magi, who could read the signs, didn't understand them. Meanwhile, the Jews had the signs and ignored them. And so the foreigners came and praised him. So it sets the context of the birth of Jesus as an event that happens removed from what should have happened, what God would have liked to happen. This was not the way that it had been planned. And so we've gotten to this point, and so I'm going to now turn it back a little bit to fill in some of the blanks, because there are a few issues. So one of the issues, I don't know if you've noticed, is that Joseph and Mary still seem to be betrothed and not married. And so there's something fishy there, something that is not quite clear. And the church does respect Joseph's position. And here I'm speaking from the Eastern perspective as well as the early church. The title that Joseph has from the very beginning is Joseph the Betrothed. So, although he is spouse, although he is husband, and in the genealogy of Matthew, we see at the very end, and this is before the event of the birth of Jesus, we see in chapter 1 of Matthew, it says here, Eliud, the father of Eleazar. Eleazar became the father of Mathan. Mathan, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. So we know that they got married at some point. It's just nobody seemed to be invited to the wedding. One of the points of, I guess, a little bit of contention is the person of Joseph. Because in the narrating of the story, I think human nature, history, piety has tried to give him an understandable, tangible role. And so in some ways we've put aside like God's perspective on this and brought Joseph a little bit more into the this mysterious incarnation. So Joseph has, and this is I guess now very pertinent since Pope Francis has designated a year dedicated to Saint Joseph. So I can't really ignore any of this. I have to put in my 2 cents here too. The person of Joseph has 3 specific roles, and this is according to the plan of God. So he is protector of Mary and Jesus. Protector in the sense not only of taking them away from Herod, taking them to Egypt, taking care of the home, providing for them. He also protects Mary and Jesus from the consequences of the law. Joseph at one point was considering divorcing Mary quietly because he couldn't wrap his mind around what was happening. He knew he wasn't the father, and he was confused by what had happened, and so his attempt or his thought about divorcing them quietly or divorcing Mary quietly would have, and quietly is the key word, it meant that he would have claimed paternity over the child, and however, he would still divorce her. And so he would come across as looking like a father who abandoned his wife and newborn child. He was willing to take that on because the flip side of this, according to Jewish law, was that a mother having a child outside of wedlock would be stoned to death with the child. And so, and those laws, although there's a lot of debate about if they were really in the time of Jesus, if they were actually followed, because the Jews didn't really run the show. The Romans were the ones in charge. Remember how the high priests had to go to meet with Pontius Pilate because he was the boss. And so the same way, we're not sure if they could follow these laws. However, it's better not to risk it. And so Joseph was able to provide also that legal protection as the father. And although, we don't talk that much about the fact that he wanted to or was considering to divorce her quietly, we don't talk about it that much. But you have to think that in the midst of all of these things that are happening, things that he doesn't understand, he was quite a mensch, being willing to be the father, and he looked bad. And so this way Mary could, live her life and do her things, and whatever he had imagined was the scenario that led her to have a child. And so he was a decent guy, because I think most men would flee, not my child, not my problem, that type of an attitude. And so for him, this was quite it was a part of his process, so yes, it wasn't the perfect solution, but he was trying to work through this. So his first role is as protector. His second role is that by declaring his paternity over the child, he grants the child legitimacy. The Messiah was to be born legitimately, so not the son of a single mother. And no matter what the origin of the paternity is, for earthly laws and the laws of Moses, according to what was lived in Judaism at that time, Jesus needed to be legitimate. And so having Joseph as his father provided that legitimacy. And then thirdly, what happens when on the seventh day after a child is born within the Jewish tradition, the male child is circumcised, and the father declares or acknowledges his paternity. When that happens, if the child is his own biologically or not, so this also happens with adopted children. When the child, when the father acknowledges his paternity, the child automatically receives the entire historical and cultural and spiritual DNA of the father. And so the Messiah is on both sides of his family a descendant of King David. And that's a very important thing. So, these are really huge things. This is very important for God's plan. So now let's put in our plan. Well, this is where it's gotten messy in the way that we approach Joseph. So the idea of the Holy Family is a nice idea, nice theme. However, between Mary and Joseph, the church teaches there was no sexual congress. So they did not have any sort of relations. And so when you see sometimes the images of the Holy Family, you see, for example, that Mary has like her head on Joseph's shoulder, and he's hugging her, and there is some what I would say some really awkward behavior going on, and some of it I think comes out of a human necessity. We project sometimes our own emotional state of mind onto some of these figures from the Bible. And so we think, well, Mary must have been lonely. And so this way, at least she had a man in her life. She needed a man, there's nothing worse to say today than that. And so because of that need, we project intimacy into their relationship. And intimacy does not mean only physical stuff. We project like an emotional intimacy. And so, it's like, well, Mary and Joseph, they had like a love connection, but no sex. That's how it comes across. The problem with that is that, firstly, it's not according to God's plan. And Joseph, according to the tradition of the church, was an older man. So he was also not, as driven by libido as a younger man would have been. But Mary had this experience of God that begins with the Annunciation. God cultivated and prepared her for the encounter with him. And once God filled her, touched her, and really you could say changed her, there was no longer any emotional weakness in her that would require or be comforted by the presence of a man. So for Mary's own well-being, emotionally, spiritually, she did not need Joseph. And that's sometimes hard to hear, because we do have the images romanticized of the Holy Family. And that doesn't mean that there isn't some affection between them. Obviously, they collaborated very well. They took him, after all, he was brought up by Mary and Joseph together. She refers to that when Jesus is found in the temple at 12 years old and says, "Your father and I have been looking for you." And so Joseph is not somehow, we have to take away some of our human emotions in this God picture. And because it's not that Joseph felt slighted or that somehow, he was like excluded. And so, Mary didn't deal with him or anything. No, I mean, their home life would have been blessed by the presence of God. Here is a man who had been confused at one point, however, who had seen in his own life and his call to be father and husband to Mary and Jesus, he had seen God working. And now for him to be in the presence of Mary and see how God is working directly through her, and to share her faith, to share that vision. She had a connection to God like no one else on the face of the earth. Not even the prophets had that kind of a connection to God like Mary. And even though she had the child, that connection stays. That connection is still there. And, Mary in the Gospels is not necessarily very loquacious. She's quite demure and quiet. There are these moments that happen when Mary, for example, tells the stewards at the wedding in Cana that they should go talk to Jesus. And, this is not just a proud Jewish mother, pointing the way to the Messiah, but she knows that there is God's power. How does she know it? Well, because she's connected. And so her relationship with Joseph is a unique relationship. We can't compare it to anything. We can't say, other than the legalisms, that he is husband or he is engaged or betrothed, we can't really talk too much about the nature of their relationship, because there has never been a relationship like that from Adam and Eve. And there will never be another relationship like that. And so their relationship is unique. And then also then it brings around the issue when it comes to what is Joseph's direct relationship to Jesus? Well, we can for certain, and I've seen a lot of paintings that show an affection between Jesus and Joseph. And I think that, in the purest sense of love, Jesus, who is God, who is love, that relationship, no doubt, was beautiful and strong. Joseph probably provided some education, some, training and some skills, perhaps in carpentry. He would have done the same things that any father did with a child who was growing up. The issue is that, the child is also God. And so, we don't know how that might have looked, where Joseph builds a table and little 3-year-old Jesus builds a model of the Taj Mahal. How the divinity was expressed in the child, we don't know. But we do know that the child did not lack for the presence of his Father, God the Father. So Joseph was not somehow father in lieu of God the Father. God the Father was not a deadbeat dad. Jesus says it. He was a part of his upbringing. Jesus at 12 years old has it crystal clear. Would you not know that I would be in my Father's house? That's in direct reaction to Mary saying, your father and I. And it's not a slight against Joseph. So again, even Joseph's relationship with Jesus is unique. It's a different relationship. It does consist of fatherhood, but it also has these aspects of protector, granting him legitimacy and giving him the lineage of David. And Joseph has a unique role that the church has expressed, and this is what I grew up with in Catholic schools. Joseph was called the foster father. And that is perhaps the closest expression we have or know that would tell us about Joseph and Jesus. And, and foster father, our problem, not the Bible's problem, our problem is a lot of the context of things today. So, you talk about and read about and get scandalized by the state of foster care in Texas. And, and when you talk about fostering children and all the problems and how it's a questionable practice. It's a negative word because it's like the child should be adopted. But when a child is adopted, so the new father has legal rights as parent, and the biological father is out of the picture. And so we can't say that about Joseph because we'd be hurting the image of God the Father. And so how to express then this duality? And it's the same thing. How we have difficulty in understanding the duality of Jesus as a child, God and man. We have difficulty also then in expressing the duality between, God the Father and Saint Joseph over this child. And that's, might be a little confusing, but it is a theological reality. And it's something that I think it's important to take stock of so that we can have a healthy approach to the person of Joseph. So instead of projecting on him other images that may be more familiar to us, we can respect and love and venerate him for who he really is and what God has called him to. And he didn't have any problems with that. He was okay with that. It was not, it's something that was revealed to him in a slower way. But nonetheless, it was also a part of that revelation. The interesting, we had that we had that question about when did Joseph and Mary get married? Well, we can go here to the Gospel of Matthew after the birth of Jesus, and this is where we read about Joseph's confusion and his idea about divorcing Mary. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, into your home, for it is through the Holy Spirit that this child has been conceived in her. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. "Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke, he did as the angel of the Lord had commanded him, and took his wife into his home. So this in the Gospel of Matthew, this is intimately connected to the birth of Jesus. And so at some point there, perhaps on the way to Bethlehem, we don't really know for sure, but the marriage occurred. And so the angel, in a sense, the angel is giving very specific directions that also enable us to read into the events as they transpired. Now, so we've gotten this far, and I would like to take a look just kind of briefly to fill in a little bit of the blanks in the narrative of the marriage, the relationship between Joseph and Mary, and what happens according to the Proto-Evangelion of James. It does fill in some of the missing spots so that we have a little fuller image. So Mary, as a child, is presented in the temple according to the tradition of the church. She is nourished by angels who visit her as she lives in the presence of God in the temple and grows there. And she also is connected with the weaving of the temple curtain, the temple veil. So when she is there, she has certain tasks that are associated with that. So starting in chapter 8, Mary reaches the age of 12. The high priests, they become concerned because she is nearing the age where she will begin having a monthly period. According to Jewish tradition, the loss of blood renders one impure. And then when that person who is impure comes into contact with pure items, they also become impure. And so the temple was that one place where ritual purity was maintained at every cost. And so their concern was simply a reflection on Jewish tradition and Jewish practice. The high priest, who we are told is none other than Zechariah, and there was at this time, there was another high priest whose name was Zechariah, who was not John's father. So historically, there might be a little bit of a confusion of names. But nonetheless, according to the Proto-Evangelium, it is considered to be John the Baptist's father. The high priest prays to God for guidance, and an angel tells Zechariah to assemble the mature single men, specifically widowers. And each widower is to bring his staff. So like I guess a kind of like a walking staff. So in chapter 9, Joseph is one of the men who comes to the temple to meet with the high priest. The high priest collects all their rods, and he takes the rods into the temple and blesses them. And then when he returns, he distributes the staffs, and Joseph is the last one to receive his staff. As soon as the staff was given to Joseph, so a dove flew out of the staff. There is another version of the same thing. This is kind of like drawing lots. There is another version that is also used and well known, is that the sticks or staff or rod that they had, they were supposed to show the high priest and who had the longest, I guess, staff. And to figure out, that would be the drawing of lots. And Joseph, when he realized that Mary is a young teenage girl and feeling embarrassed to be there for this ritual of engagement, so he took his staff and he hid it in his cloak so that it would not be visible. And God caused his staff to flower. And so as he hid it, it bloomed out. And so that's one of the reasons why Joseph is depicted holding a flowering staff or what's also a lily, like a lily, a symbol of both chastity as well as a symbol of that flowering of the staff. So there are, with many of these stories from the early church, there are variations. So, but in the most common one, so it is a bird that flies, a dove that flies from the staff. And so basically then Joseph refuses to take Mary, and he tells the high priest, Zechariah, that he is too old and that this is just, she needs to be with someone else. The high priest threatens Joseph and tells him that God chose him. And he reminds Joseph of what God did to others who refused him. I love that. That's talk about a classic guilt trip. And so he then takes Mary to his home, and God protects her there. That's what it's very interestingly worded. So in chapter 10, now the other thing, Joseph also leaves her at his home, so probably with his extended family, and then he goes away, and he goes to work because he is working away from Nazareth. In chapter 10, the priests decide to have a new set of temple curtains spun, and they try to recall pure virgins who would be capable of spinning something that would be blessed by their purity, so that it would be appropriate to hang within the Holy of Holies. And so the priest sends for Mary, and Mary is charged with weaving the temple curtain in scarlet and true purple, the colors of royalty. And so she takes the blessed yarn, the skeins actually of yarn, she takes that home and then begins to spin at home. And then in chapter 11, we read about Mary, about the First Annunciation. Mary goes for water, and Gabriel speaks to her. She runs away frightened, and then she begins to weave again, and the angel appears to her. And that is and I'm just kind of summarizing, so we go through the chapters quickly. In chapter 12, Mary gives the scarlet to the priest, and then goes to visit Elizabeth. These are the little coincidences. So while she is already pregnant, so she was weaving this curtain before the Annunciation, then the angel comes in the midst of this, and she continues the weaving. And so she is weaving this container. It's a curtain in the round that has no beginning or end. And so she is weaving this curtain for the Holy of Holies, just as within her body, Jesus, God and man, is forming. And so there's this interesting juxtaposition that one realizes when you lay out the chronology. Then continuing in chapter 12, Mary stays for 3 months with Elizabeth. Chapter 13, Mary returns to Nazareth. Joseph returns home and is shocked that Mary is pregnant. So he's been away all this time. And then we have an interesting exchange. Joseph initially scolds her, but she tells him that she is innocent, that this happened by the plan of God. Joseph in chapter 14 has his doubts, but the angel appears to him and reassures him and tells him a little bit about God's plan. And then in chapter 15, the high priest and the other priests at the temple find out that Mary is pregnant, because Joseph had been entrusted Mary and to take care of her and to also take care of her virginity. And so the priests express their disappointment in Joseph, and they summon both Mary and Joseph, and they give them the test of bitter water. And it is seemingly like an Old Testament based test for truth. And so and both of them are revealed to be telling the truth, both Joseph as well as Mary. Chapter 17, Joseph and Mary head to Bethlehem. But Joseph, who is betrothed at this point, Joseph doesn't know how to register Mary because he's not sure if they should, if she should be his wife, if he should go through with the marriage, considering that she is pregnant. And so he has thoughts about perhaps adopting her, in a sense, being more of a father figure rather than a husband. After all, he is caring for her and he is protecting her. In chapter 18, and this is just part of, I think, it's a way of expressing Joseph's confusion because he knew what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to take care of Mary, protect her, and keep her safe. And also, he was aware that he was protecting her chastity and virginity. In chapter 18, just outside of Bethlehem, not in the city, he finds a cave for Mary, and he goes into the town to find a midwife. It is when he is walking in town that he has a vision of time stopping. That there's a moment when things are frozen. And that's sometimes interpreted as being the moment when Jesus was born. And because it's, it is that cosmic alignment between divinity and humanity. It is, although Jesus forming in Mary's womb is already the mystery unfolding, it isn't until he actually is born and takes his first breath that it is realized. And so, in a sense, all of the motion and movement of nature and the cosmos stop for that split second as divinity and humanity meet. And so that's what usually that is interpreted as. Chapter 19, Joseph finds a midwife, and she questions him about his marriage/betrothal. She's not completely convinced that this is all on the up and up. And so he tells, though, the midwife that she is indeed a virgin. And then she goes and assists Mary with everything around the birth. And after coming from the cave, she goes and tells a friend of hers, a lady who is also a midwife by the name of Salome. And she tells Salome that she saw something incredible, that she saw a virgin give birth to a child, and yet she is still a virgin. And Salome tells her that this is ridiculous, and that with her finger, she wants to see if Mary is indeed a virgin. The hymen test, I guess it would be. It's definitely interesting. So, but here again, remember, don't get too distressed by the stark reality of this test. This is, again, more of a reference to resurrection, to Thomas, saying, put the finger into Jesus's side. So the test of authenticity being touching with the finger. And so in chapter 20, Salome comes to the cave and examines Mary. And as soon as she touches Mary, her entire arm withers up. And she begins to lament and ask God for forgiveness for her unbelief. The angel of the Lord then tells Salome that if she touches the infant, she will be cured of her withered arm. And that is what we see. Let's see. This is a copy of a 11th century ivory It's a copy, though. It's not, I wish it was the real thing. And we see right here is the midwife, and this is Salome, because her arm is there revealed. And so this was used then in iconography of the Nativity to show that Jesus, after birth, needed to be washed, just like any child after being born. And it also serves as a baptismal symbol because it looks like a baptismal font. So, but this is the most important thing here, is the presence of Salome. And she appears on icons, and we'll look more next week at some of the icons. She appears in icons already in the 8th century. So her disbelief, her unbelief rather, actually helps in showing the authenticity of Jesus's birth, that he was truly born as a child, born under normal circumstances. And so, then after in chapter 21, and it jumps around a little bit, we hear about the Magi and Herod. And chapter 21 is very close to also the gospel text. So it uses a lot of the same expressions, and it might even have been copied out of the gospels. Chapter 22, Herod is in a rage, and he orders the killing of children under 2 years. So we can already kind of suppose that Mary and family are now no longer living in a cave, but are living in Bethlehem and in a house. The Magi, and next week we'll talk about this, the Magi probably came to a child who was already a little older, not necessarily an infant. And, because the timing, the way we celebrate it, it's all kind of compacted into the stable. But their time is spread out a little bit. So Herod realizes that he's been had, and he sends his henchmen after Zechariah, the high priest, because he wants the high priest to tell him who the Messiah is and what this is about, and if this is truly authentic. Elizabeth, realizing that John is also in danger, she finds a remote, hidden cave in the middle of the mountains. And there, God assigns a guardian angel to protect them in the cave, where they remain until they can leave. In chapter 23, Herod asks Zechariah if his own son might not be the Messiah. See, this echoes back, remember when John was being mistaken for the Messiah? So Herod is already not sure about it. And Zechariah tells the henchman of Herod that he does not know where John is, and Herod's men murder Zechariah in the temple, Holy of Holies. And that's pretty much where it ends. Chapter 24, Zechariah is found dead. His blood, because this is again a question of purity, his blood has desecrated the Holy of Holies, and then Simeon is chosen to be the next high priest. But this gives us, it fills in a little bit of the narrative, because it's not as simple a story as we might sometimes think. There are a lot of different factors, and especially when you throw in Herod and the political things that are going on, it really gives it a whole nother layer. I thought, there are things that we read in the Bible that we sometimes are unsure of, like the historicity of it and if it really happened. I remember when I went for the first time to the Holy Land. So I went on my own and was specifically sent to visit certain priests. And I was a seminarian at the time. And when I went to Bethlehem, so the priest who was there took me to near the Basilica of the Nativity, underground, underneath the Basilica, there is kind of the remnants of a cave church. That it's not specific, it's not the cave of the birth of Jesus, but it's a site that is closed off, so it is not accessible to the public. And we went inside the cave. He could let me in because it was under the protection of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And I remember we went into the cave, and then there was a secondary gate, a metal gate, and you looked into the cave, and there were hundreds and hundreds of skulls of children. And it was like, it brought it to life. This is where all of the innocents who Herod had put to death in his search for the Messiah in order to kill him, this is where their bodies had been laid to rest. And it absolutely, you think that perhaps some things might have been exaggerated or different in the Bible telling. And then when you come into a place like that and and just see that, it is heart-wrenching, and the innocents, we celebrate them in church also because they are the first martyrs for Jesus. And so they hold a very special place for the church. And so I think we should stop at this point to take some questions, and then next week I will pick up where we left off and integrate a little bit more of the iconography and images. And I do have so that it is well balanced. One of the things to consider, we have images of the Nativity of Jesus. So we have an idea that we have perhaps received from when we were growing up, perhaps a nativity scene, a crèche that we saw somewhere or had in our homes. A lot of this has informed what we imagine when it comes to the event of the Nativity of Jesus. And so next week, what I'm going to do is undo a little bit of that, going back to shared images. So images that are not just icons or not just things from the catacombs, but also beautiful French and German and Spanish images of the Nativity. Because the image of the Nativity was expressed in much the same way for probably about 1,300 years, 1,400 years. And things begin to change there around the year 1400. and so some of the we begin to see different depiction of Jesus, and that brings about the images are reflective of the teaching of the church. And so one of the pious approaches or theologies was that the birth of Jesus was a little different, and that it was, and this is an issue more in the West, because certain theological approaches, specifically scholasticism and St. Thomas Aquinas, begin to analyze some of these aspects of what happened. And so the question then was raised that if Jesus would have been born in the same biological fashion, then he would have broken Mary's hymen, and then she would no longer be considered a virgin. And this is where theology kind of goes bonkers. It's like, somebody needed to say to whoever came up with that speculation and say, hold on. If God can cause this child to be formed in Mary's body without her losing her virginity, then perhaps, just me, but perhaps he could also leave her virginity intact, but these are things which start to come up, and they affect then the some of the aspects of the depiction. So that's where you get the image of Mary kneeling. She is kneeling, next to the Christ child. Christ child is on the ground. He's not even in the manger, because he's just been born in a mysterious way that Mary did not lose her virginity. And so she apparently wasn't then even tired from giving birth, so she was able to very comfortably kneel there. It's dangerous when piety and theology start to mix with some of the realities and come up with different things. But we're going to look at that. We're going to talk about some of that, because those are things which have a certain history. They do reflect some good theology, but they also sometimes take us in a different path that is not necessarily respectful of some of the things that happen naturally, which that is a key element of this feast. Also, next week we'll talk a little bit more about the genesis of this feast, as far as how it was dated and where it comes from, and the oldest observed celebration of the Nativity. So this way we can, and that's not going to be long and complicated, because it doesn't go through too many chapters. It's just a statement of basic history, and then the layout liturgical calendar according to what would be the most teachable when it comes to teaching the faith through the celebration of feasts and fasts. That's what the liturgical calendar is. Okay, any questions? No, it is not different, but I think that the expression refers more to the married state, as opposed to their the expression of sexuality between the two, because it is the point where there is this transition also from being betrothed to being married. Uh, I I don't know. That I would have to look up. But I think the other thing too is also remember that prior to uh, being married, they could not live together, and that was not necessarily a statement about their relationship. It was a statement just about the legalities. And when you're betrothed, you could live in the same family compound, but you couldn't share space. Also, the other thing too is that um, because of the sexual mores and traditions at that time, they would not really talk about um, you know, the shared marriage bed as being somehow that just wouldn't be right. So they would use terminology that talks about the legality of that relationship as opposed to its consummation. Well, the terminology, it's sometimes, you have to be careful about jumping to an alternate meaning or reading more into it than is intended. There is the understanding that God reveals to us as much as we can understand. And, we hear about that expression is used when talking about, like, when Jesus reveals his divinity to his three favorite apostles on Mount Tabor in the Transfiguration. So he reveals as much as they can take, because, there's obviously an infinite amount of God's plan that we cannot even begin to comprehend. And that's one of the reasons why, and next week we'll talk about this too, this feast, the Feast of the Nativity, is connected to the Feast of the Baptism of Christ. And although, and unfortunately so, in the West, it's become the Baptism of Christ, which was formerly celebrated on January 6th, has been now preempted by the three kings. And so then I guess the Sunday after the 6th is then the baptism of Christ. And it removes the 12 days of Christmas. And there was a setup for that. And but it also removes the theological mind of the church when it says, okay, everything that is obscure and mystery and shrouded in darkness, the confusion of all of the main characters around the Feast of the Nativity, all of that is now enlightened. Light is shed upon it in the Feast of the Baptism of Jesus, when the Trinity is revealed for the very first time ever, clearly revealed, and where God the Father speaks the words over Jesus that tell the world who he is. And so those feasts, they're bookends. And that was completely intentional. That was not accidental. And that's exactly, it sets us up. It's okay to venerate and embrace mystery, because in due time, God will reveal. Okay, well, next week, part 2. So, and we'll be covering a lot of stuff. We'll also, since we'll be talking a little bit about some of the historic depictions, so I will put my 2 cents in preparation, my 2 cents in on the Vatican's nativity display. And I have to say, I love it. I am I will go on the record. I love it. The set was made. It was made in the Italian region of Abruzzo, which is very famous for its production of ceramic statues and ceramics in general. And this was made by a school that was specifically dedicated to arts. It was done between 1965 and 1975. And each class added to the nativity scene. They're larger than life, and they're very 60s. Obviously, they added the astronaut in when the year of the lunar landing. So there is a reflection of a lot of the things that were going on at that time. I think, remember that nativity scenes are in church, it should be a specific way. It should be more traditional. But the public nativity scenes, like outside, or even the ones we have at home, they're very artistic. And they're much more culturally connected. I have my favorite nativity scene is one that was made by an artist in Argentina, and they're all figurines from the Andes. There's absolutely no historical connection to, in the way that it is depicted. And I mean, in my nativity scene, in this nativity scene from Argentina, I have llamas, I have penguins, so there is that part which can be different, original, and artistic. And I'm very happy to see that at the Vatican, outside, affirmed. People are talking about it, but they are magnificent works of art. I mean, they really are impressive, the way that they are made and produced. They're unique, they're different, but they have a context. The other part of it, too, is that the Vatican used to spend over $100,000 every Christmas on their nativity scene. And so in 2012, as a part of budgeting and not wasting money, the Vatican started asking to borrow nativity scenes. And they borrow the nativity scenes only within Italy. Italy has a lot of big scale nativity scenes, so there's no shortage there. And so they every year borrow from a different region or a different school. They borrow a nativity scene, and so it's economically responsible. I also do like, that mid-century modern, there is an artistic aesthetic for like that period of the 50s to the 70s. And that's what it is. You can definitely get a feel for it. But I'm open to it. I saw just recently, a couple months ago, I saw in Santa Fe a beautiful display of nativity scenes made by different pueblos, by different Native American tribes. And, I'm sure that if Vatican put up one of those, they would probably be freaking out too. But it's almost seeing in a very physical way enculturation and God connecting with that tribe, that nationality, that ethnic group, that the incarnation becomes a part then of our human history, because, now we can see those symbols of our background, our nationality, our culture, also in that moment of the nativity. I do differentiate, though, church should have more general traditional nativity scenes or icons. But, when it comes to your homes, under our trees, that's where it can be very personal, and it's not a bad thing. The big earthquakes that happened 10 years ago happened in Abruzzo. I mean, it destroyed the infrastructure of the entire province. So it's it's not all Pope Francis's fault, as some people would like. See you next week. Blessed Advent preparation for Christmas.